Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Resilient. Highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Jared Moon here, and welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. So this week we have Dr. Dan Siegel. Really interesting conversation. So if you have been following along, so we have a lot of different stuff that we cover. I mean, I like strength and conditioning, but the whole Better Humanology part, the reason it was called Better Humanology, it's kind of the study of being a better human, right? And it goes beyond just how our muscles work, how the programming works. There's a lot of mindset involved, and the research that's coming out on this stuff has just been phenomenal. If you guys are keeping up with it or just listening to the podcast and hearing about it, you know, like the ability for our lifespan coincides so much with your relationships, and if people are in your life and all these things and interacting with other people, you know, meditation, consciousness, mindfulness, whatever you want to call it, this is all becoming a really big deal. It's not some woo-woo thing really anymore. And I think back in 2015, when this first got started, that's how a lot of people felt about it. But now we bring the research, and that's why I liked my conversation here with Dr. Siegel. So he is kind of pioneering the field of interpersonal neurobiology, and he takes a lot of different fields of science and applies it to the mind, the brain, and how this works. He even gives definitions for these things in the podcast. He walks you through a couple different processes that you can use and utilize in your day-to-day, and he has some great information on his website. He's written a ton of books, guys. This guy, not some guru that we found, I don't know, in a robe somewhere. He is an absolute genius. I mean, he got his medical degree from Harvard. He is now a clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA School of Medicine, and he's the co-founder or the founding co-director of the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA. Done a lot of stuff, a lot of amazing books, a lot of stuff about interpersonal neurobiology. That's what I want you to kind of, it sounds maybe like a kind of a crazy title, but if you really think about interpersonal neurobiology, he's combining two fields in a lot of different scientific fields that aren't normally combined, but he's not just doing this stuff for, just for anecdotal evidence. He has a lot of studies, published research studies, and all sorts of things that you don't normally get to see in this field. So I really suggest, if you're interested in that back-end brain, brain training type stuff that we discuss a lot, that I really like to dive into, that whole mysterious side of the human being, I think that we have not even come close to figuring out. Definitely listen to Dr. Siegel, get everything you can out of this one, and I'll catch you guys next week. Dr. Siegel, welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. I am super pumped to have you on today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, I know it's going to be a lot of fun. I've been looking over your work and everything that you've done. It's really cool listening to TED Talks. I mean, you've done a lot of cool stuff. We're gonna dive into a lot of it. I'm excited about it. But before we do, we got to hop into some challenges, get all the listeners fired up and learn a little bit more about you. So let's start with a fitness challenge.
Okay. So what I like to do for a fitness challenge is do the staircases in the town I work in, which goes up and down and up and down and up and down these cliffs. And, I see my peers doing that, and sometimes they do it 2 steps at a time, sometimes do it sideways, sometimes do it with their arms going way up. And, I try to be careful because I've hurt myself doing that. But that's what I find one of the most challenging things is doing the staircase in our town.
Yeah, very, very challenging. Anytime vertical space gets involved, fitness gets challenged for sure.
Yeah.
How about a mental toughness challenge?
I do the Wheel of Awareness mental training every day, and every day it's different, and it's challenging in a really great way, and it's something we can talk about, but it's what I do to challenge my mind every day and keep my mind fit.
Okay, yeah, we'll come back to that. I'll make sure that everyone's knows what we're talking about when we go there. So how about a book recommendation?
I think I'd recommend 2 books. One is by a good friend of mine who sadly passed away about 10 years ago, John O'Donoghue. In Ireland, you say John O'Donoghue. And it's called Pastures of Wonder. And it just came out recently. And It's a beautiful, beautiful book of someone interviewing him, John Quinn, an Irish radio icon, and it's got a great foreword by Krista Tippett. And it's just a beautiful book by a really beautiful man, John O'Donohue. He and I were working on a book together, and I wish he could have read this second book, which I'll recommend, which is the book I just released called Aware, the Science and Practice of Presence. And I think a lot of what John and I were doing together as collaborators, he would have really enjoyed in the book Aware. So those two books is what I'd recommend, Pastures of Wonder and Aware.
Awesome. Great recommendations. Now, if we could get a background on you, take us as far back as you need to, bringing us up to today and what you're most passionate about working on these days.
Well, I think the best summary is to say, I was born a young child with my mom and dad. And, basically, I was really fascinated with people and with life. So I studied biology, went into medicine, was fascinated with kids and how they develop. So I went to pediatrics initially, but then realized I was really interested in, in the mind. So I became a psychiatrist and then a researching psychiatrist, studying parent-child relationships. And then as time unfolded, I became more an educator in the field of mental health and I still work in a field called Interpersonal Neurobiology, where we combine all the fields of science together into one framework to ask questions like, what is a healthy mind? How can we cultivate a healthy mind? And that's what I write about. And so basically, I kind of translate science for general use by the public, by parents, by teachers, by therapists, people work in businesses, all sorts of folks find our work very practical and useful in what they're doing.
That's awesome. So you say all fields of science into interpersonal neurobiology. What are we talking about from an application standpoint? Like, how would I use this? Because I love when science gets practical, and that's the best type of science, right? So how are we using that in a practical application?
Well, Jared, imagine this. Imagine that you have a mind, right?
Yeah, I can picture.
Okay, good. Now you're going to be surprised by this, but in this journey of interpersonal neurobiology that I've been on, none of the fields that deal with the mind actually say what the mind is. They describe it, it's feelings, thoughts, memories, stuff like that, attitudes, your intentions, but they don't actually say what that stuff is. So what we do in our field is we actually offer a definition of the mind, which I can give to you. And then from that definition comes incredibly practical application. So one simple thing is to say that the mind is something that's actually not identical to the brain, but it includes the brain. It also includes our relationships with each other. And, rather than give you the technical definition, I'll just say from the definition, you get this view of what a healthy mind is, which comes from a process called integration, which is the different parts of something being allowed to be special or unique or differentiated, is what we say, and then linking them together. So integration is simply linking different parts. Now, what's amazing about that is that linkage of different parts, integration, turns out to be the basis of well-being. So whether you're focusing on your brain or your brain and your body or a relationship you have with a friend, integration turns out to be what leads to harmony and well-being and thriving. So the practical implication of that is you can say, in our view, that here's how you cultivate well-being. You do anything you can to allow whatever system you're looking at. If you're just interested in your own body, fine. Interested in your own brain, fine. You want to look at how different parts can be strengthened in their differences and then promote linkages among them. So you coordinate and balance, let's say, how your brain works. And research shows that with certain mind training practices, you can actually make a more integrated brain. And the research on the brain, for example, shows the best indicator of well-being in the brain is how integrated the brain is. So that's just for the inside your head. If we look at relationships, you can work on relationships in the same way. When relationships aren't going well, they're either in like chaos or rigidity, and that means that integration isn't there. And the practical implication is you identify, where am I not respecting the difference between myself and my friend, let's say? And then how do I cultivate compassionate, respectful communication to link us once we've developed these respectful ways of honoring each other's differences? And amazingly, you go from chaos and rigidity into a state of harmony. And so whether you're talking about relationships, talking about the brain itself, integration is a practical implication of this field I work in. This is what we suggest is health is coming from.
Okay, awesome. That's an incredible definition. Now, I would like to kind of get into some of that, but hop back to, just because we were talking about practical application, the wheel of awareness that you mentioned that you do in the everyday. I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, if you take this idea that integration is health and take a second idea, which kind of struck me as incredibly fascinating, that if you're, let's say, going to the gym and wanting to consciously, intentionally change your body in a positive way, you've got to be aware, right? You got to be aware of what you're doing in the gym. If I work with parents all the time, and if a parent is going to really try to help a child grow well, they've got to be conscious of what they're doing. If a teacher in a classroom is going to help a child learn during the year of that school year, right? They need those children to be conscious, and the teacher needs to be conscious too. And if, as a therapist, a psychotherapist, if I'm going to really help someone change in psychotherapy, they need to be conscious. So what I did was I said, okay, if consciousness is needed for intentional change, that's a really fascinating statement. And if integration is needed for health, it's also an interesting statement. What if you combine the two and said, I'm going to integrate consciousness? So that's what I did with my patients. They looked at me like I was absolutely nuts. And they said, what are you talking about, Dan? And I said, just bear with me. I know this is weird. I know it sounds like out in left field, but let's try it out. So they would get up from their chair or couch. We'd walk over to this table in our office, which has a center glass part and like an outer wooden part. And when you look through the glass, you can see like this stand that holds up the table off the floor, and it looks like a spoke. And so it kind of looks like a spoke of a wheel, where the center glass we'll call the hub, the outer wooden part, let's call that the rim. And then you got this spoke. So I said, okay, if you're going to integrate anything, you got to make the different parts be honored for their differences, and then you want to link them. So let's differentiate consciousness. And then they go, all right, what do you mean? What do you mean? And I said, well, consciousness can be simply defined like if I say, hello, Jared. Now, were you conscious that I said hello?
Yes.
Okay, so you've got two things happening there. You've got the conscious experience, which we'll call being aware, put that in the hub. But then you have the sound hello, right? Hello is not awareness. It's the thing you're aware of. So you can call it a known and put it on the rim. In the hub, we're going to put the knowing. That's being aware. So the simplest way of defining consciousness is it's this capacity to be subjectively aware, the knowing, and have something that you're aware of, the known. And we're just going to visually separate them out on this table, I would tell my patients. And here we'll just picture it as a wheel. So you say, okay, fine. What are the different knowns you can have? Well, you can take that rim and divide it into 4 quadrants. One of those segments would be the outside signals from sound or light that we call hearing or seeing. We also have smell, taste, and touch. Those are the things you're familiar with, the first 5 senses. You can move the spoke over to the second segment of the rim. This would be the interior sensations of the body. And in science, we actually call this the 6th sense, right? So the first 5 bring in all sorts of energy flow, basically, from the outside world, like air molecules moving is sound, light is photons, that's a form of energy, that's seeing. And we're also now going to the inside of the body, and that's energy flow from inside the body. Okay, fine. Then you can move the spoke over to the 3rd segment of the rim, and here you have mental activities like thoughts or memories, emotions, attitudes, intentions, stuff like that. And just to keep the numbers going, we'll call that the 7th sense. And then you move the spoke over even one more time to the last segment of the rim. It's our sense of connection. Like right now, Jared, between me and you, we're connected in our communication, or anyone listening to us can feel connected to the two of us. And that's a relational sense of interconnection. So we'll call that the eighth sense. So I would do this with my patients, and sometimes we would even bend that spoke around and explore the hub itself, the hub of knowing, which is really a wild part of the exercise. And people would start reducing anxiety. They'd start feeling happier. If they had mild to moderate depression, it started improving. They even could deal with traumatic events from the past in a different kind of way. And if they were facing medical challenges, they could do it with a lot more resilience. So I was kind of blown away. So I thought to myself, well, I'll teach it to my students who were therapists. They started finding it helpful, really practical, very simple, but practical and powerful. Their patients started getting better. So then I decided to do it in workshops, and I did it systematically, recording the results. People would take the microphone and we'd record what they experienced with 10,000 people.
Wow.
And I've done it with a lot more people now, but I just did this in a systematic survey. And so in the book Aware, I talk about how to do the wheel of awareness practice in your own life. Talk about 5 people who've done the wheel, and then you learn what's the science of the mind that can help us understand the nature of being aware, and how you as a reader can actually cultivate more well-being by actually cultivating this integration of consciousness practice called the wheel of awareness.
I like that. So everything stems back to integration.
Yeah.
That's probably, I think I want to talk about integration a little bit more, because it seems like it's like a simple, not easy thing. It's a simple idea, but it's not, I don't feel like it's easy to just integrate different parts of our mind and in our body. So when you are walking through this process with someone, like, what would be the first step to get more integrated? I guess, for lack of a better term, what would be the first step in that direction?
Yeah. Well, the first step is to, do what is probably the most challenging, is just make a decision. I'm going to try to train my mind,
Yeah.
It's just like you say to someone, you're going to the gym, okay, I'm going to now go to the gym. Well, once you get to the gym, like I went to the gym this morning, I was there, right? And there's all the equipment. Okay, now, so that was the hardest stuff. So the first step I would say to anyone listening to us is say, you need to realize that you're empowered to use your mind to strengthen itself, to actually make the brain more integrated. That's what the studies show. And even improve the health of your body. Your immune system will get better. The way to your cardiovascular system function will be better. You'll reduce stress. You'll actually reduce inflammation. And even, this blew my mind, you'll even slow the aging process with the components of the wheel practice, allow you to basically develop focused attention, open awareness, and kind intention. Those 3 pillars, they have been shown in research to actually slow the aging process by raising an enzyme, optimizing the level of it so it repairs the ends of your chromosomes, which whittle down as you age. So it slows the aging process. So the first step is to have your intention. Now, a lot of us are so used to focusing on the outside world that the next thing that's challenging is, how do you learn to just stabilize attention a little bit, right? Because a lot of times we are drawn to outside stimuli, like our phones or a computer or a television set or something, or what someone else is doing. So to actually take time to focus inwardly, which you could call reflection, is something a lot of people these days are just not used to doing. So that is the second stage. The first is saying, I can do this, and I'm going to have the intention to do it. The second is, how do I start building attention? So there's a simple breath practice that I teach in the book. You can do this from my website. People come to the resources tab and just do this all the time, where you learn to focus attention on the breath. And you can do this just for 3 minutes, 2 minutes, a minute, whatever. When your mind gets distracted from feeling the sensation at your nostrils, or your chest rising and falling, or your abdomen moving in and out, and you're thinking about some meeting next week or something you're upset about from last week or whatever, instead of getting mad at yourself, just take a deep breath and just realize that's what the mind does. It has a mind of its own. And now you redirect to the breath. this simple practice, as ridiculously simple as it sounds, we did a research study to show that it powerfully actually turns on the circuits of the brain that regulate attention, that control your attention. And then over time, if you practice regularly, you can actually improve attention with this simple breath practice. Wow. That's what our UCLA Research Center was able to demonstrate, even more than if you were taking medications for attention problems. It blew our research colleagues away, like, oh my God, which medication was that? You got such amazing results. And we said, take away the C and put a T. And they go, what do you mean? They go, it was meditation, not medication. You know? So anyway, I mean, that was pretty exciting. But the issue for us is, so start with that, start with that for a week, 2 weeks, whatever, just so you start feeling like, wow, I can really focus on something. I couldn't before I started this, because here's the secret, Jared, where attention goes, neural firing in the brain flows and neural connection grows. So this is going to blow your mind, but we now know from research that the following is true. How you focus your attention in a disciplined way can get specific areas of the brain to grow. And just like you can choose to exercise a certain set of muscles at the gym, you can exercise a certain set of circuitry in the brain with your mind. And that movement of the circuits, that activation of those circuits is called neural firing. And amazingly, when you do this on a regular basis, neural firing becomes neural rewiring. You actually change the structure of the brain with the focus of attention that you determine with your mind.
Wow. And so we're talking that all stems from the simple breath practice that stabilizes our attention. You go through neural firing to neural rewiring just from a simple 3-minute meditation practice is where we start.
That's where you start. Now, the research suggests you want to do more than 3 minutes every day, and ultimately it may be about a dozen minutes. As one of my colleagues who studies attention, when I put it to her, I said, what do you think is the absolute minimum ultimately? Not the beginning. If you want to start with 1 minute a day, cool, that's great. But you probably want to get yourself up to a dozen minutes, which in the beginning may feel like overwhelming. I do 30 minutes a day and I love it. And I wish I had more time to do 45, but and you'll see once you start doing this, especially when you do the wheel part, because the focused attention is what you do in the first 2 segments of the REM. And that's awesome. You focus on not just the breath as a starter, but sound, what you then see, what you hear with sound, light coming in, what you see, smell, taste, and touch. That builds focused attention. Even when you do a body scan, when you're in the second segment, diving into the sensations of the body, you're doing one at a time. So you're also building up the same circuitry of focused attention. So that's the first pillar of mind training that's shown to really be helpful. The second one is open awareness. Now, as you're doing that, you're saying to the REM, hey, any feelings or thoughts or memories, bring it on. I can be so solidly in my hub, I can welcome anything in. So in a way, this is like the opposite of that breath practice where you said, I'm focusing on the breath. If a thought comes in, I'll consider it a distraction and I'm going to acknowledge it, let it go and return to the breath. That's fine. That develops focused attention. Now in open awareness, you're actually playing with a very different sensation where you say, I'm just going to be open to whatever arises. These things that arise are not distractions. They're just points on the rim, but you strengthen differentiating the hub from the rim. And that's the power of that part of the practice, among many things. And then you develop kind intention on the 4th segment of the rim, which is developing a sense of compassion and kindness towards your inner life and towards others. And when you do these 3 things, the research shows you're actually going to grow a more integrated brain. So when you ask the question, Jared, is it hard to get to the integration piece? Once you stabilize the monitoring, this attention thing, you're then learning to modify where energy and information flow is going on inside your head. So that's literally the circuits. And you're going to be integrating them, meaning literally if you just look at that wheel, you're differentiating all the different REM elements from each other. So that's differentiation. You're differentiating those REM elements from the hub. So that's more differentiation. And then amazingly, with the power of attention that spoke, you are linking the whole thing together. So when I ask people, well, how did you feel after you did the whole wheel practice? This huge smile comes on people's faces. They go, I feel so calm. And the weird thing is, a lot of people say, before I started, I felt agitated. I felt restless. I felt depressed. I was having a funky day. And then I did this wheel practice. And a dozen minutes later, 20 minutes later, I'm feeling like a different state of mind. I feel really happy. I feel energized. I feel joyful. Literally with the 10,000 person study, this is an incredibly common response. And you could say, wow, how can you go from a funky day and being in a bad mood to shifting in just such a short time? And that's the power of integration. You see, this is where the science of the mind and saying, the way an optimal, we call it a self-organizing process, this mind, the way you optimize self-organization is through integration. That's where you say, well, okay, you're integrating the most potent thing you've got, which is consciousness. And you're taking the most potent thing you've got to create well-being, which is integration, and you're integrating consciousness, and wham, you've become empowered to really be the captain of your own ship.
That's incredible. I think, at first hearing, basically by definition, you said integration equals health, and I was like, well, let's, what are we talking about? How does that work? Having heard you kind of explain how that all fits together, and you talked about, it affecting people from depression to, you actually mentioned the outside of cells, shaping up and getting better. So really it all stems from integration of the brain. What would you say the biggest limiting factor or something that's holding us back in getting to more consciousness or more integration? What do you think is holding us back from doing these things a little bit more organically?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Jared. And I would say there are a couple of things. One is, in our modern times, we have gotten so used to the world around us taking control of our attention, so that we are drawn to, this app or that app or this thing on a screen of a computer or whatever. And so we haven't really learned the art of having an internally generated organizer of where our attention goes. So we're externally pulled rather than internally the captain of our ship, basically. So it's like being, just to keep the boat analogy going, it's like the boat's got no rudder, it's got no steering wheel, and the wind is just blowing it around, right? And let's just call that, for a simple term, automatic pilot, meaning the stuff around us is just pulling us here and there. So consciousness, being awake and aware and intentional in living, is a beautiful, beautiful example of empowerment to turn off the automatic pilot, to put a rudder in the sea, to get your steering wheel for that boat. And whether it's a motorboat and you're driving around, or if you like sailing, you put up your sails, and you're the one who's going to go through the winds. You may not determine all the winds of the world, but you've now got your sails down. You got your, not just your rudder so you can steer, but you got your keel, so you know how to move this boat through the water. As someone who doesn't know sailing will probably be so confused with what I'm saying. but the idea is that the world around you is going to always have wind blowing at you.
Right.
The wheel of awareness builds all the structures of your mind that you need to actually guide yourself through the winds of life, right? And so the second thing I'll just say is that, besides automatic pilot, is that, in school, we're not given the opportunity to learn to develop these reflective skills. I mean, this is kind of a sad thing to say, but not only in the field of mental health do people not define the mind, but neither do school educators. So we're taught a lot of facts and skills and stuff, but no one ever teaches us how to actually develop an inner compass to build this capacity to have a strong, resilient mind. So a lot of the work I do in schools now is to say, hey, let's wake up to this sad reality that the field of mental health and the field of education don't define the mind. And yet, if you ask people in either of those fields, what are you doing? They'll say, oh, I'm helping cultivate a healthy mind, or I'm helping build the mind of the youth of America, or whatever, wherever we are. You know, you say, well, what is the mind? They go, what? And I go, what is the mind? They go, well, no one ever told us in our education. I said, right. So this is part of the issue, is that everything is external. When you realize the mind is both an inner and an interpersonal process, and understand it's a regulatory process, this is the self-organizing, what I call embodied and relational regulatory process, you can teach regulation. Like, Jared, if you're going to ride a bike, you want to monitor where you're going and modify. You want to listen with your ears. You want to feel the balance of your body. You want to watch with your eyes. That's all monitoring. But to regulate, you don't just monitor. You've got to modify, like steer the wheel, pedal the pedals, put on the brakes when you need to. That's how you modify a bike. Well, the mind is a regulatory process too. See, a self-organizing, embodied and relational process is regulating energy and information flow. Is our definition. That's the technical one I didn't say before. But once you offer that definition, which I offered back in 1992, a long time ago, then you say, well, how do you optimize self-organization? Well, you do it with integration. That we've talked about that. But then you say, well, how do I if the mind is a regulatory process, how do I actually build a strong mind? And then it's very simple. Stabilize monitoring, so you see with more depth, clarity, and detail. And then learn to modify what the energy and information flow, how toward integration. It's kind of that simple. And amazingly, people are never given that. So you ask, why doesn't happen more organically? Because people think it's all external. It's all external. So with this simple definition, you get this very practical notion. Let's teach you how to monitor with more stability. And then what people describe in the 10,000 person study is, oh my God, I started seeing so many details I've never heard before, seen before, smelled before, tasted before, felt with my touching, felt inside my body. I'm so amazingly aware. I guess the stuff was there before, but I didn't know. So that's the first thing that is so exciting. The second thing is you say, you're in charge of moving that spoke around. So instead of being on automatic pilot where you're pulled up to the rim, you're now sitting in that hub with this huge expanse of awareness. So that if you think about it this way, before, let's say your hub of your wheel was like the size of an espresso cup, and life dished you out some real challenging thing like a tablespoon of salt. And Jared, what would it taste like if you had like a espresso cup of water? We took a huge billowing tablespoon of salt, dumped it into your cup, and said, Jared, drink.
Tastes salty.
You wouldn't be able to drink it. It's
No.
so salty. But let's say we did a training like the Wheel of Awareness, and we took that container of awareness, which before, like most people, was the size of an espresso cup, and we made it like 100 gallons big. And now we take the same life challenge. Here's a tablespoon of salt, Jared. We stick it in your 100-gallon container, stir it up, and what's that water going to taste like?
Yeah, it'd be negligible.
That's right,
Yeah.
negligible. It'd be fresh water, basically.
Yeah.
That's what the Wheel of Awareness does. It makes your container of awareness so vast that the same thing that before overwhelmed you when you were an automatic pilot, now with this huge hub of awareness, you're like a different person. And that's how people describe, they go, I don't know what this wheel did to me, but whoa, and it's like, okay, it's integrating your mind. And that's the beauty when I said you draw from all the science. I write science books and stuff, and I write practical books. The thing that's so fun about combining it together is that you don't have to worry about the science. You're going to get the practical findings that, it only come from a deep scientific dive. But then once you say, okay, that looks like that's what the nature of mind is, or the nature of a healthy mind. Now let's do the practical stuff. That's all you need to know.
And so this level of awareness, perception, new perception, is this what helps with the relationship side of things, your relationship with other people? Because I think you mentioned that at the beginning, correct? Different or better relationships being a part of the integrated process, I think, just as human beings. So where does that fit in?
Exactly. Well, that's exactly the issue. So let me just say what the research shows is that people who do practices like these do become uh, capable of more rewarding, mutually satisfying relationships with others. So that's what the research shows. Then we can say, well, why is that the case? One of the ideas is exactly like you're saying. When you have a bigger container of awareness, then let's say you're talking about a romantic partner, and this person does something that before would have made you really annoyed, right? You think that's not the right thing to do. And, you know, and let's say it's a very minor thing and you get really upset. Well, that creates a lot of problems in the relationship, right? Now, with a bigger container, what used to be annoying has now become just amusing and you accept it, right? There's a much, much deeper kind of acceptance that comes when you have this vast awareness. So you're not just pulled onto the rim point that says, why did he or she or they do this thing? You know, why did it happen that way? No, you just say, okay, that's the way it was. And there's a kind of acceptance and joy just that here you are able to be in a connection. The second reason probably why relationships work well is there's a particular area of the brain. It's called the insula. And this area of the brain has been shown to grow with these practices. So that's interesting. But this is an area of the brain that is involved in two really big things related to relationships. One is it allows you to actually feel the feelings of others in a much more full and connecting way. So it's called empathy, and it's the basis for empathy and compassion. And the second thing is that it actually lets you become aware of your own emotional state and regulate that state. So before, if your emotions were going all over the place, now you've actually developed the exact part of the brain you need to, yes, feel your feelings more, but even regulate them more. So this whole regulatory thing we're talking about is not just what you do with your mental experience, it's actually changing the regulatory structures in the brain. So that's probably why. And as you become, regulated sounds like a funny word, but regulate just means more with coordination and balance. So as you become more balanced, some people would use the word equilibrium, or there's a great word that we usually don't use, but it's called equanimity. When you have this sense of peace inside, then other people are going to be drawn to you and you're going to be able to connect with them, and they'll also develop more equanimity in themselves. So it makes relationships much more relaxed and rewarding and connecting.
That's incredible. And if I wanted to start this practice today, or anyone listening want to start today, how long, is it the basics of building a habit? Like how long till you start, I don't know, you said after one session sometimes, but to see some like real changes, because I know neural rewiring probably is not an instantaneous process, probably takes time. So how long should someone expect to, practice this and really just feel like a different and better person?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing to say is, getting yourself ready for doing the practice. Just like if you're going to, let's say, run a half marathon or something, you don't just run the half marathon. You get yourself ready for it, right? You start working out, you make sure you stretch, things like that. So in a similar way, you might want to start with a basic attention training practice like the breath and do that for a week or so and really feel like, okay, I think I've got this under my belt. I feel good about this. And then you do the basic wheel. So on our website, even if you want to drop into the basic wheel, we also have the breath practice there. Go to the resources tab and you can start that right away. In the book, what I suggest is that if you've never done a reflective practice, take a week or two to do just attention training first. Then once you've done that, you want to then start to do the basic wheel. And that's a wheel without flipping the spoke around, because that's a pretty advanced step and you don't need to start with that. And it has a very simple way of feeling connection to other people around you and stuff like that without other statements of kindness that come later on. But you do the basic wheel. Now, in terms of what you're saying about the brain, by 6 to 8 weeks of doing something like this, the brain will likely have started changing its structural connections. And I say that to be very, very conservative. I know studies where you do a day-long workshop and they can show changes in the structure of the brain.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's been repeated several times. So, you could say, working on it for 8 hours for a day is good. The better way to think about it is kind of like teeth brushing. Like, Jared, do you brush your teeth every day?
I do.
Okay, great. There was a time when people didn't and their teeth rotted, right? And I remember once my dentist I said, well, what do you think about teeth brushing? He goes, you don't need to brush your teeth. I would only brush the teeth that you want to keep. That's what he would say. And I thought, okay, that's really funny because exactly. So, if you think about everything we said that these practices do, slowing the aging process, reducing inflammation, optimizing cardiovascular functioning, helping the immune system work well, reducing stress, integrating your brain, all that stuff, think about it like toothbrushing. We know now that brushing your teeth on a regular basis, as in daily, is really, really helpful. And you don't just say, I'm going to brush my teeth once a year. And you say, well, you have all this teeth problems. Yeah. Well, but I brushed it last summer, So this is kind of like a practice like that. It should be thought of, the research suggests, as a daily routine you get into. Just like you breathe every day, you brush your teeth every day. Brushing your teeth and breathing are really good. This set of practice, the Wheel of Awareness has 3 research-proven elements to mind training, focused attention, open awareness, kind intention training, all built into one practice. So I do it every day, and it's kind of like just a regular practice. Now, you're asking, okay, even if it becomes a regular practice, when would you first start seeing results? And people will say after a couple of weeks, they will, or sooner, even after the session. I do workshops where it's just one, someone's in a bad mood, they do the wheel, now they're in a good mood. So that's like 30 minutes later. It's like that. So you will see immediate subjective feeling changes, sensation changes. Probably the brain changes would take, longer, and you'd want to be conservative in making any statements like that.
And I think that that's just important to note, for people who want to practice it, because I know I've done some meditation practices and then slipped on it, and I can just tell a huge difference, when you aren't doing it, when you're out of practice, if you will. You're not brushing your teeth, like what you're saying. And
what have you noticed? What have you noticed is a difference when you don't do it?
Like you were really relationships. If we go back to that part of the conversation, I've noticed that if I'm not as aware and don't meditate as frequently, my relationships start to suffer because my mind's constantly racing. I'm not as aware in my relationships as I should be. And I find taking some sort of practice or time at the beginning of the day gives me a better direction for the day to be a little bit more, on a perch, ready. I can see and make my decisions, as opposed to, like you were saying, getting tossed around by just everything that's going to happen to me that day. And when you're in that situation, you just feel like you're getting beat up every single day, and it's no surprise. And I'm not perfect. I actually really want to, fully dive into your process. And I think it sounds very interesting, but there's a huge difference I've noticed between having some sort of awareness practice and not having it. Exactly.
Well, that's so beautifully said. And the nice thing about the Wheel of Awareness practice is it's a completely science-based practice. It's inspired by science. Its components have been affirmed by science. And it has the 3 aspects built into one practice. So you don't need to say, oh my God, should I do this one or that one or this one? You actually get like a complete meal with this one practice. And, for people who are in a rush, I do have a 7-minute version, where with each breath you move the spoke around. And there's longer versions, and you can try different ones. And ultimately, when you experience it, I think, and this has been so fascinating, with all these people that have been doing it in the workshops, when you experience it, you realize you're in charge, right? So there's people who never realized they actually can intentionally do something with their attention into awareness, those three things, intention, attention, awareness, that actually empower them in ways they didn't even know before. They could be empowered to feel better, first of all, to get more in touch with what's going on inside of them, and then to connect with other people in a more meaningful way. And then when they hear what the research shows about these 5 ways the body's improved and the structure of the brain becomes more integrated, which is the best predictor of well-being, they're going like, oh. And the neat thing is it's all science affirmed. So it's not like an opinion. It's like in very rigorous scientific journals. And now we just want to make it accessible to everybody because it's just like brushing your teeth. You know, when you brush your teeth, you're taking care of your teeth. When you integrate with the wheel of awareness practice, you're basically strengthening your mind, and you're the captain of your ship.
And if we wanted to, I have 3 young kids. I have a 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and a 5-month-old, and I would love to kind of implement some of these processes. And I know you talked about doing it at schools. You think it should be part of the a common practice. What do you recommend if you wanted to introduce something like this to your children?
You know, in the Wheel of Awareness explanation we have in a book called The Whole Brain Child that I wrote with a wonderful colleague, Tina Payne Bryson. The Whole Brain Child actually has a section on teaching the wheel as a drawing to kids. In the book Aware, I have a story of a 5-year-old named, I call him Billy. You know, you can see how he used the wheel just as a drawing. And just the idea of integrating awareness, where you're separating the knowing from the known for a child to just draw that and see it, it's been so fascinating how just the idea is empowering. It's why I start the Aware book with the statement from Oliver Wendell Holmes: a mind stretched to a new idea does not return to its original dimension. This idea, I can integrate consciousness even as a drawing, empowers kids to realize there's a whole bunch of stuff on my rim. So even if I'm lost in sadness or anger, it's just one of many points. And no matter what's happening on the rim, I have this sanctuary of the hub that I have available to me all the time. That makes a child wide awake, aware, they live with intention, and they're able to deal with a lot of the tablespoons of salt that life dishes out and all the distractions we have with a lot more clarity and resilience.
I think that's incredible stuff. Well, I really appreciate everything we've dived into. So I want to be mindful of your time, hop into the quick fire questions of the show, then ask you the question. So if you're ready, are you ready for the quick fire questions?
I'm ready.
All right. What's the hardest workout you've ever done?
Oh my gosh, it was probably climbing up a mountain in Yosemite, when I hadn't been doing that for a while, and the air was a little thin, and I did it though. I made it to the top.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
You know, I would say integrating your mind with the wheel of awareness is the best mental activity to do for mental toughness.
Awesome. All right, now the question of the show. What is the best advice you have for becoming a better human? This is 100% open-ended.
I think the way we can become a better human is to realize that while we have a body and we're born into a body and the body's important, you want to sleep it well, give it good food, exercise it, stretch it. You want to really enjoy your body. That's all great stuff. But who we are is much more than our body. It's much more than our brain. Our relationships with each other and with nature are also who we are. So the way I like to remember that is the body is the me. It's like the wax of a candle. And that's important. You get about 100 years to live in this me body. But we are also our relationships with other people and the whole planet. And let's call that a we. That's like the light of the candle. So you are the light beyond just being the wax alone. And when you start to live like that, then life really gets a lot of purpose, meaning, and connection. When you realize, okay, if I'm a candle, I'm both the wax and the light. I am not just me, I'm also we. And the way I try to remember that in a single word is with the word we, M-W-E. Who we are as individuals is actually a we. And when we live like that, life can become much more rewarding for every one of us.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Dr. Siegel, it's been a blast having you on and learning about everything you have. I do think that everyone should go pick up your book. We will link to it in our show notes for sure. But where else can people go to learn more about you, your work, your other books? You have a lot of stuff going on. Where should people go to learn more about that?
Our website, drdansiegel.com, DRDANSIEGEL.com. That's the best place. You can do the Wheel of Awareness there. There's links to a whole set of courses we have. There's a lot of free stuff, videos, audio stuff, a lot of really good ways of learning about this material. And of course, you can do the Wheel of Awareness through the Resources tab.
Awesome. And we will link to that in the show notes. Dr. Siegel, thank you so much for your time. Everyone else, please go check out his book, check out his website. Really amazing stuff. I'm talking about life-changing type stuff. So guys, don't ignore this. Go check it out. All right, Dr. Siegel, thank you so much for your time and for being on the Better Humanology podcast.
Thanks, Jared. It's a pleasure.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.